with your name and then spell it for me again.
Okay. Ashley McFarland, ASHLEY McFarland.
And what is your title?
I am the Center Coordinator for the Michigan State University Upper Peninsula Research and Extension Center. I'm also an Extension Educator for local food systems.
Okay. Go ahead and ask a question, and then I'm going to like raise the tripod up to get a different angle, so in between the first and second. So go ahead and ask.
Okay. So will you describe the type of research that's going on in this particular facility?
The research going on at the UP Research and Extension Center is focusing on three main goals. The first would be integration of crop and livestock systems. And so instead of just looking at those systems separately, we want to see how they can integrate in a typical farming operation and whether or not there's benefit to that. And so we'll be looking at integration of crop and livestock together at multiple levels. We'll be working on a 5-year rotation sequence looking at anywhere from an intense cropping situation all the way to an intense grazing situation to see how that affects profitability and then also soil health. And that's actually our second goal, is looking at soil health and soil fertility, because we do have an issue with that in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's quite a challenge for our farmers, and so we want to see what kind of operations and production we can do to actually enhance the soil health instead of just degrading it. And then the final goal is looking at local food systems and trying to integrate more of that into our local food supply. So how can we take the agricultural commodities and produce that's coming off our farms up here and actually putting that back in the local food supply chain, working with not only producers but also consumers and the supply chain.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the extension presence that you're hoping to build at the center and what you hope the end goal of that is?
Certainly. So the UP Research Station, as it used to be, never had necessarily an extension appointment tied to it. But they did a revisioning of the center, and now it's the Upper Peninsula Research and Extension Center. And by adding that E, they've also added a half-time position, which I currently hold, that has a focus, as I said before, on local food systems. But that's going to allow more extension application here at the farm. So not only the research that we're doing here can then be communicated down to campus, but we also have folks on site that can actually then disseminate that information out to the public and be involved in more of that traditional extension programming with the outreach efforts.
Here's what I'd like for you to do. The audio is going to be fine. I will hold this, and you can look at Natasha. And am I out of the shot? Okay, am I still out of the shot? Okay. You want to throw the headphones on real quick? And then you want to count to 10?
Sure. 1, 2, 3,
Good.
4,
Okay.
5.
All right. Then go ahead. You can take those off, and then ask your questions. Just look at Natasha, and that way we can get a little bit different angle.
For you, I want to just like a half step back. When you move, then you're right.
Okay.
Okay. So can you talk a bit about the application side of the research and why it's important to people in the UP and that it's region specific?
It's very important to have an emphasis placed on research in the Upper Peninsula because we have very much, let me start that over. It's very important to have a research station focused in the Upper Peninsula because the challenges that we face here, not only with our soil, but also our climate, are very unique to where we're at. And so if there was research done down on campus and then we try to apply that to farmers here in the UP, it's really hard to make the connection. Also, we have an isolation issue here as well. So things aren't as accessible to us here. The same markets aren't here for us. And so really being able to connect locally to our clientele is important, and having some of that research interface. It allows us also to work with cooperators out in the field, so we can work with farmers and actually apply some of the research we're doing on farm instead of being 5 or 6 hours away. So it is really important to have that local focus here with the research station, and I think that the communities really enjoy having kind of that interface available to them.
Yesterday you talked a little bit about how you're hoping that because of being found in the UP that you're able to partner with other groups who have a similar climate, whether it's someplace else in the world or if it's over across state lines.
Sure.
Can you reiterate
Yes, yep. So the regional perspective is really interesting here as well because we have very unique climate, and a lot of that has to do with the large water bodies that are surrounding us, and that makes us very unique, not only with the snow load but also our temperatures. And although we are unique here in the upper Midwest, we're not unique to other places across the nation and also internationally. And so I think there's a lot of interest in doing more research that can then be applied to other parts of the country and world, because although we're unique here, it's not a unique situation across the continent.
One quick thing, can you just look in the monitor and see how that sun's hitting her forehead?
It's kind of chalk.
Okay, let's move up a step, right there, stop there. I'll readjust the recording. Just make sure I'm not in there, please. This isn't something sure. Okay, am I good?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I need to check the sound.
No, sound should be good.
And is there anything else? This is wrapping it up for the video. Is there anything else that you want to share with us about the center that you think is important that people who don't know a lot about it might want to know or would benefit from hearing?
Sure. I think it is important to note that the center has changed a lot over the last few years. Obviously, we no longer have the dairy herd. We're focusing more on beef production now, but we're also just trying to figure out what kind of research is applicable to our producers in the area. And agriculture is changing. It's changing everywhere, but the face of ag up in the UP is definitely changing. We have an increase in individuals wanting to get into vegetable production, looking at using hoop houses to extend their seasons, and then also looking at more small grain production as well, which typically tends to be harder downstate just because of the temperature extremes. But up here in the UP, we have that cooler, moister climate, which allows us to thrive with some small grains. And one of those that we're looking at is actually barley production, because the microbrewing industry in the Michigan is expanding greatly, and the actual malting barley production in the state is not keeping up with that. And folks do like having their local Michigan beer. So we're looking at trying to stimulate more barley production in the UP by doing applied research up here and working with collaborators like the Michigan Brewers Guild to try to stimulate that production and provide a local barley source for our brewers.
And one quick question, you can look at Natasha. How important is it to have a research center here where you can do the work, whereas farmers and growers might not have the time or the land or the money to do this?
It's really important to have research stations located throughout the state, because not only do we provide that interface with the university and our clientele, but it also allows us to go and do the research that the farmers do not have time to do or the resources. So we can take our small plot trials and do things at a very small scale, repeat them, run the statistics on them, and see whether or not things are working. And then we can go out to cooperators and blow it up at a larger scale to see if it's going to actually work on an on-farm operation. And it's nice that we can do that because we can afford to make mistakes every once in a while, and although we don't always have success in our plots, that's still good information for our farmers to know whether or not certain varieties are going to perform well in the area or not.
Good?
Can I ask her her story?
You wanted to hold the mic then?
Yeah, you can. This part doesn't matter.
Okay.
Okay, so when you were thinking about, when you're looking at the job and the responsibilities for the position and the center and all the things that would come with it, often when I'm interviewing someone or I'm writing a story, when they're talking to me, like my brain's working and I can see an angle or a way for it to come together. When you were looking at the position and where it was going, did you, like, what made you excited about it? What vision did you
Yeah.
have?
So when I looked at the position, at first I actually was a little weary of it because it did have a large focus on the community food system component. And my prior work is actually in more natural resource management. So looking at watersheds and identifying pollution sources, specifically within agricultural or natural resource-based watersheds like timber and mining, and really trying to find pollution sources and then finding ways to fix those issues. So although I have not worked in the agricultural field in quite some time, I did think that this position was really interesting just because I would be able to reconnect back to ag, and it had that program management component that I enjoy doing because I like problem solving. And so obviously we have a research station here that has been underutilized. but cost the university quite a bit of money to maintain. So how can we kind of flip those things? How can we make this a very utilized facility and also at the same time take care of itself financially? And so that was something that really kind of spurred me into going to the position, because I saw it as a very good challenge. But I was fairly new to the area and really hadn't been connected in the agricultural community when I moved here. And so I was able to go and kind of do some research and looking out on the web, and also interacting with some local farmers, and also visiting the farm as well, and just trying to see what is the capacity for here. And what I saw was a beautiful farm site with beautiful buildings and a wonderful staff that was willing to make things work and really wanted to grow agriculture. I also met with the growing UP Ag Committee, which is kind of the unofficial advisory board for the farm. And it was really interesting to interact with them as well, because not only did they see a need for production agriculture to increase to sustain the agricultural economy, but also that we needed to look at our youth as well. And that was a piece that I thought was really interesting, that I hope to explore more. Is I think that if we want to increase agriculture here, obviously that's going to increase jobs in that sector. But if we don't have youth returning back to the UP, then it's really hard to fill those positions. And I think that it's important to relay to our youth that a lot of ag jobs now are very technical. It's not just driving a tractor or moving cattle anymore. It's, running GPS units. It's doing precision ag and field planning on a computer. So I think that that's a really interesting component and a niche that we could potentially fill up here in the UP, because we do have quite a few area community colleges and other universities locally that we can work with on that. So I saw that as an interesting piece. But I also thought too that, ag in a lot of places in these kind of smaller remote communities are kind of falling short, because the larger scaled commodity, traditional, conventional ag, whatever you want to call it, has been taking over, just because it's more efficient as far as finances. But what we're hoping to do here at the farm is show that those small, sustainable farmers can still efficiently be productive on their farm and make the finances work. And I think that that's something that's interesting to do here, because I grew up on a small farm myself. And so I think being able to kind of reconnect to that small farm community was really exciting to me as well, and looking at how we can make folks profitable that want to homestead, or just be able to raise some cattle on their land and still make it go and support their family. So I think that the UP is very well positioned for that kind of lifestyle, and it'd be nice if we could support that, because it is a valuable component of the agricultural sector.
Two things that you said yesterday that I thought were really intriguing, and one of them you hit on it in the video, or the segment from the video earlier, was that even when there are things that we would call like a failure, or something that we don't have great success with it at the center, it's still a win for growers and producers.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it, and the fact that we're pulling up these researchers from MSU who are doing work that is sort of controversial, maybe a little bit risky, and how you hope people in this region will benefit from that?
Sure. One good piece to that is actually replicating essentially the student organic farm that we have downstate on the East Lansing campus, and taking a look at that model and trying to replicate it up here in the UP. And so essentially that would be looking at developing hoop houses, land for vegetable production or other things, fruit trees, nut trees, whatever it may be that folks want to kind of essentially produce off the land. But look at how we can take that model downstate and apply it here to the UP. And we're working with two great researchers downstate with that. Dr. Matt Raven, but then also Dr. John Bierbaum, who runs the student organic farm currently. They've been up here to look at the site, and they see a lot of potential for it up here, and I'm excited. I think we also have the opportunity to pull students from other universities and other educational facilities. We don't necessarily have to just pull Michigan State students, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that works up here in the UP. Will we have the student capacity to run a farm like that? Will we have enough people in the community interested to actually then buy CSA shares or go to the local farmers market and buy from us? So that's definitely a model that we're testing here, and it may not may not float. We don't know. But I do think that there's enough interest in the local community to have fresh local produce that I think that it's going to work really well. But it's going to be interesting to see another really stark contrast is downstate. They're able to get things out of hoop houses over 10 months out of the year. And I just don't see that happening here because we're going to be buried in snow, our hoop houses included. So I think it's going to be very difficult to actually get as much produce off of this student farm as they do down in East Lansing. And will that affect our profitability? Will we still be able to financially overcome those hurdles? Because as I said before, I really want to make sure that this farm, when students come here and apprentice and kind of work through the incubator system, when they leave it, they also have a business plan, because it's not good enough just to say, I went to the farmer's market and I made $50. Is that then not only recovering your cost for that production, but also are you able to support yourself or your family with it? Because I think that's a really important piece. Because people tend to work very hard on a farm, and to not be able to make a living off it is really a disservice. So hopefully we'll be able to apply that model from downstate up here, but that's one of those cases where we're really going to have to see whether or not our weather cooperates and if our community buys into the idea. It was neat to see, though, at our field day in July, when we had participants out here in the afternoon session, we actually split folks up. They could either stay at the newer farm south of town and look at more of the integrated crop and livestock production, which is more of our traditional research areas, or did they want to come up to the north farm and look at how to build hoop houses, basically from scratch. And over 2/3 of our participants came here and were interested in that perpetual produce concept, or the 4-season farming and the hoop house use. So that shows right there that at least the local regional community here wants to see this happening, because they want the education. They're really seeking that out. And I've had quite a few farmers. I've even had actually someone in the military contact me who's local from the Chatham area, but must get the newsletter via email. And he's stationed over in Afghanistan, and he's planning, when he returns from service, to come to this area and be a farmer and have hoop houses and things like that. So stories like that really inspire me to keep going, because I do think that there's people that want this here. It's not just campus saying, hey, it's a good idea. I think that there is a local community need. And another thing too, another interesting example, back to the barley, is for 7 years, Chris Kapp has been doing barley research here at the farm, and only 1 year have we met the American Association of Malting Barley's standards. And you would look at that as potentially a failure, but what we're finding through our partnerships is the Budweisers and the Miller Coors of the world need those standards in place because of the way they refine the barley and process their beer. But our local microbrew and the craft brewing industry doesn't necessarily need to adhere to such strict standards. So that's something, even though we've had maybe some challenges meeting those, we're actually having conversations now about how can we change the standard for a different clientele that hasn't been traditionally met by extension or ag bio research. So that's something I'm really excited about too, because it's going to be really changing for the industry, not just one farmer, but it's something that could potentially change the industry of barley farming in Michigan, and I'm excited about that.
Second to last question. So change isn't something that is usually well received by people, and I know that you and your family have gone through a lot of change over the last year in coming here and in taking on this job, and the task force that was put in place by campus has big goals and big dreams for UP Rec that it's very different from its original mission and vision. So can you talk about why you think the change is necessary? Because
Sure.
I think it's necessary and good, and I think that a lot of people are on board with that. So
Sure.
talk a bit about why it's necessary, why it's good, and what you think will eventually become of it. And you hit on that last part of it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
don't feel pressure.
Okay. No, I think that the change that's been recommended for the center is really important. Although I was not here in the heydays of dairy farming, and when they had, I know, a very profitable herd, it was very clear in just the research that I did on the farm that the dairy cows were not necessarily important to the dairy industry, and that the research that we could do on the farm would be looking at more or less how do we handle the forage end of it? How do we feed our cows so that they produce good milk in high quantities of milk? And so I don't think necessarily having a herd in place was important for that piece, because really we need to do more on the ground forage work. And I think that that's something that's really important and part of the change here at the center that I like that we're doing. And the other very overarching goal that's really kind of at the crux of everything we're doing here at the center is looking at that soil fertility piece and the soil health, because it all comes back to that. We could not have healthy cows producing milk if we did not have the proper soil to produce those forages. And so instead of just looking at forage production and how do we increase dry matter intake and all of those things we traditionally look at, let's look at the soil and how we can build a healthy soil and then transfer that to nutrient dense food, not only for ourselves but also into our livestock, which then means nutrient dense products from them. And so it's really important, I think, that soil piece, and oftentimes it gets overlooked because a lot of people think that soil is just the hand they're dealt with. They have to work through it. They're going to put inputs in to make the soil work. And that's not necessarily always the good way to go about it, because sometimes lowering your inputs is going to, in the end, actually increase your profitability. So instead of just keep putting things into the soil and mining them back out, how do we foster the soil to kind of build its own nutrient base in there and actually improve the organic matter and also the microbial activity in the soil profile, and actually how does that then affect yield and produce off the farm. So I think that that's a really important piece and a big basis of the goals that we have here at the center. And I think people are interested in that as well. At our field day we had a lot of interest in how we're doing new soil analysis methodology here at the farm. I've had farmers in the area ask about how we're doing that and then are trying to learn some of those same processes so they can conduct them on their farm. And I think that's a good sign, because that's people just kind of evolving in their thought process that that soil piece is really important. And folks, I think, are excited because they've seen the hiring of the coordinator for the research at the farm. And so that task force that was developed to kind of create a new vision for the farm, they're seeing the changes and now they want to see them all. They want to see things happen at the farm, and they're definitely holding us accountable here. We have quite a few stakeholders that I'm in touch with on a weekly basis that are excited about what's going on at the farm, but they want to keep seeing more. And so that's why we're really trying to work with collaborators, not only regionally but statewide, to kind of stimulate the resources coming into the farm so that we can get that information back out to our clientele that have really kind of sparked the revisioning for the research station.
Is there anything else you want to share with me? That the focus of the story is to paint a picture of a day in the life at UP-REC, and that's not like, you wake up at the crack of dawn and do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
The big picture.
Sure.
What you do and what you get at and what's important. So is there anything that you want to say that speaks to that?
Sure. I think it's really important for folks to realize that at the research station here in Chatham, we're not just cows, we're not just crops, and we're not just hoop houses, that we truly are a diversified system here, which actually models the typical UP farm very well. A lot of folks in the UP that are working in the agricultural industry are very diversified, and I think that it's really important that our farm kind of models that so that we can actually work with our clientele well. It's interesting because a lot of people that come and do visit the farm have no clue how many things we have going on. The fact that we have 120 acres of cover crops on the farm right now and what we're doing with that to rebuild soil health. A lot of people don't realize that we have red Angus on the farm now, and for a reason, because of their docile nature and also their smaller frame, so they're easy to finish out. A lot of people don't realize that we're going to have vegetable production coming here hopefully within a year. So I think that the diversification of our farm is really unique in that we're not just specializing in one thing. And although you can often get spread too thin and do a lot of things not very well, we're actually trying to integrate a system system wholly here at the farm so that every piece kind of ties in with the other to make us kind of an overall very productive farm system. And we're trying to enterprise things as much as possible to make sure that all these pieces are at the end of the day affecting the bottom dollar in a positive way. And so I think that that's really the emphasis that needs to come off this farm, is that we're very diversified and that we're really getting back to literally our soil. That's kind of where it all starts. And that's important not only in our crop or livestock production, but also in our potential vegetable production that we would have here at the Student Incubator Farm. So I think that's really the take-home message, is that diversification and that importance of soil health here on the farm.